Denver Broncos head coach Sean Payton did an interview with Jarrett Bell from USA Today. The article is called Sean Payton Pinpoints Blame for Broncos Collapse and Russell Wilson's Woes. 20 Dirty Hands. I recommend you read the article in USA Today. It's a gold mine of really great quotes. I'm going to get to as many as I can. I'm not going to read every quote here from the article, but I've got like 3 really big ones I want to read and go through. The first article says Sean Payton said early on when he talked to Jarrett Bell, he said, I'm going to be pissed off if this is not a playoff team. He's talking about the Broncos. He said they should be a playoff team this year. This is a really good football team. I think Sean Payton has high expectations for his team this year in Denver. He's confident in his team in Denver. And I think everything you're about to hear, all the quotes he gave during this article, my belief is that Sean Payton was trying to give his team confidence. Say, look, I believe in these guys. Here's why they should believe in themselves. It didn't all land. We'll talk about what went wrong here, but here's the next bit of next quote I want to read. He said, it doesn't happen often where an NFL team or organization gets embarrassed. Sean Payton continues and says, and that happened here. Part of it was their own fault relative to spending so much blanking time trying to win the offseason. The PR, the pomp, the circumstance, marching people around, all this stuff. Sean Payton says, we're not doing any of that. The Jets did that this year. You watch Hard Knocks, all of it. I can see it coming. I remember when former Washington owner Dan Snyder put that dream team together. I was the coach. I was at the Giants in 2000. I was a young coach. I thought, how are we going to compete with them? They got Deion Sanders there now. That team won 8 games or whatever. So just listen. Put the work in. So listen, just put the work in. My point is he's saying we don't want to have a bunch of nonsense going on off the field. We'll talk about the Jets more in a moment, but in this article, Sean Payton talks about how last year in Denver, there was so much stuff going on outside of football off the field. In that USA Today article, Sean Payton says one of the mistakes that was made in Denver last year was that Russell Wilson's support staff was given full access to the team facility. And he said you should not have allowed that. Russell Wilson has his own team of personal employees that help him prepare for games and get better as an athlete. It's a common thing for NFL quarterbacks. You're making millions and millions of dollars. You want a lot of people helping you succeed. Tom Brady does it. Patrick Mahomes does it. Russ has an athletic trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, a massage therapist, a personal quarterback coach. But they should not have full access to the facility. They were working and operating out of the facility. Remember that story where Russell Wilson, after a loss, was doing like high knees on a plane while guys are trying to sleep? Part of that's because his people were with him all the time. And the coaching staff and the ownership and the general manager in Denver allowed that to happen. Sean Payton said, it's normal for a quarterback to have their own office to watch film in, but I've never seen the other stuff. And remember, Patrick Mahomes has a similar group of people helping him succeed, but he meets with them outside of the team facility. We saw that when you watch that show on Netflix, Quarterback, you see Patrick Mahomes leaving the Chiefs facility to go meet with his trainer at his own personal gym. He doesn't do it at the facility. It's a separate thing. And when you're losing and your quarterback has this whole entourage around him all the time, it's a bit awkward. You're like, man, what's happening here? It's better to separate them. That's why Andy Reid has Patrick Mahomes go meet with people outside of the Chiefs facility. Now, here's the third quote. When Sean Payton was asked what happened with Russell Wilson last year, here's what he said. Sean Payton said, oh man, there's so much dirt around that. There's 20 dirty hands for what was allowed. Tolerated in the freaking training rooms, the meeting rooms, the offense. I don't know Hackett. A lot of people had dirt on their hands. It wasn't just Russell. He didn't just flip. He still has it. That BS that he hit a wall, shoot, they couldn't get a play in. They were 29th in the league in pre-snap penalties on both sides of the ball. Everyone's got a little stink on their hands. It's not just Russell. It was a poor offensive line, and it might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL. That's how bad it was. I want to repeat that. It might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL. That's how bad it was. That is Sean Payton talking about former Denver Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett. To me, this is Sean Payton trying to take the heat off of Russell Wilson, trying to tell the Broncos, hey, look, losing last year wasn't because you guys suck as football players. It's because the leadership was so messy and disorganized. Things were so bad, and it's not all your fault. That quote, though, one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL, grabbed a lot of attention. Sean Payton said it, but if you watched Denver last year, I did. I watched way more of Denver than I would have liked. We all thought it. Did you not see what happened in Denver? It's funny that this was so controversial for Sean Payton to say, but he said out loud what we already kind of knew. Did you watch the Colts-Broncos game last year? It was a disaster. It was horrible. And you watched Russell Wilson fall apart, and I don't know how good Russell Wilson still is. He was good a couple years ago. He's not as bad as we saw last year. That was just an absolute mess when it came to play calling, organization, players in the right spot. Coaching was horrible. And so for Sean Payton to say the thing that we all kind of know, I guess you're not supposed to. And I'll talk about why I think you're not supposed to say what Sean Payton said in a minute. But it was true to me. I think everything he said was actually on point. Now, Aaron Rodgers responded because the failed Broncos head coach last year, Nathaniel Hackett, is now Aaron Rodgers' offensive coordinator in New York with the Jets. And he used to coach him in Green Bay as well. So Aaron and Nathaniel Hackett are tight. They're buddy-buddy. And Aaron Rodgers said, "That's my guy," and talked about how Nathaniel Hackett's a good family man. He treats everybody really well, and said, "Keep my coach's name out of your mouth." And then Aaron Rodgers continued to call Sean Payton insecure, to take another man down to set themselves up for some sort of easy fall if it doesn't go well for his team. So Aaron was incensed and kind of took a shot at Sean Payton. I totally support Aaron Rodgers, by the way, supporting your coach. That's kind of what you do. He's the biggest. And I know like the Jets head coach, Robert Saleh, said something about it. It was totally boring and not interesting, which is probably how you're supposed to answer that, actually. He said like, you talk smack, you're probably doing something right. But Aaron Rodgers defended his coach. I don't mind that. I like that. But to me, again, I think Sean Payton's intention with all of these quotes in this article was he was trying to give his team confidence and trying to say out loud why things were so bad last year and take the blame off of the players, off of Russell Wilson, off of the other guys that are in Denver from last year. And I really don't think that Sean Payton meant to create a distraction. However, he did. And the next day, Sean Payton actually said, "I regretted those comments," and was trying to support his guys, but he said, "I got to be better, and I wasn't very media savvy." To me, it sounded like, Sean Payton is good friends with Jarrett Bell, the reporter for USA Today. He said, I had a couple too many lattes. I'm like, it sounded like he was a little bit drunk, actually. Like, sounded like it was, I don't know what was going on, but it sounded like he got a little too comfortable with a personal friend who also happens to be a reporter, which isn't great. But I've got a question actually from Patreon, patreon.com/Zach Schaumler, patreon.com/Zach Schaumler. Donovan writes in, he says, "Hello, Zach's surveillance cameras." I love that, by the way. If you're going to write into the show, have a great intro like that. That's a great greeting. I love that. Donovan says, "What are your thoughts on Sean Payton's comment about Nathaniel Hackett when he said it might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL? That's how bad it was. Personally, I love hearing a head coach tell it like it is instead of giving a soft answer like most people would give to the media. What say you?" Donovan, again, what Sean Payton said was true. And I think that's important to say is he wasn't wrong. It was a horrible, horrible coaching job by Nathaniel Hackett. Everything went wrong last year, and he was clearly out of his depth. I mean, he was not prepared to be the head coach. He was not the right guy for that situation and should never have been in that position in the first place. Nathaniel Hackett got promoted farther than the level he can succeed at. And I love it. I love that Sean Payton said it. It's entertaining. It's fun. It's great. And it made the Jets-Broncos game week 5 in Denver, by the way, more interesting. It added fuel to the fire. And Sean Payton even said this the day after when he apologized and said he regretted saying what he said. He said, "I got to take my Fox broadcasting hat off. I got to turn into head coach Sean Payton again." And if you're a broadcaster, it's your job to create interesting quotes and provide entertaining sound bites. And your job is to be interesting as a broadcaster, in my opinion. But that's not Sean Payton's job. Sean Payton's job is to be a head coach and win football games. And here's why I think Sean Payton said the wrong thing and should not have given all these quotes to Jarrett Bell and said that it was one of the worst coaching jobs in history. He could have said, hey, I think he could have just simply said a lot of stuff that went wrong in Denver last year wasn't Russell Wilson's fault and left it there. And you don't have to throw Nathaniel Hackett under the bus and mention his name and also mention the Jets. He went out of his way to talk about the Jets and how they are trying to win the offseason, get a lot of good PR. And none of that needed to be said. He could have simply said, hey, I watched the Denver Broncos last year. I'm sure you did too. A lot of what went wrong wasn't on Russell Wilson. It was the situations he was put in. You could insinuate it was the coach's fault without saying it out loud. He was a little more direct than he probably needed to be. And the reason why that's a problem is that you gave the Jets a lot of motivation for that Week 5 game. Sean Payton's job is to win football games. And if you lose to the Jets Week 5, then you could argue that the quotes he gave created a loss for the Denver Broncos that maybe would not have been a big story otherwise. I mean, it would have always been the Nathaniel Hackett revenge game, but it would have been probably the Broncos getting revenge on Nathaniel Hackett for all the horrible stuff they did. Now, because Sean Payton created a fire and talked a lot of smack, the Jets are going to try to fight hard to stand up for their guy. So that's why you can't give that kind of answer if you're a head coach. If you're a head coach, your job is to give really boring, crappy answers or do what Mike McDaniels does, which Mike McDaniels gives really entertaining answers that provide nothing but entertainment. Like Mike McDaniels, the Dolphins head coach, will talk in circles for a long time. Very similar to former Washington State, Texas Tech, Mississippi State head coach Mike Leach. May he rest in peace. I was in the building with Mike Leach multiple times. I was there at press conferences watching him live. He was so dang funny. And if you would ask Mike Leach a football question, he would never answer the question. He would just turn it into a story about pirates or about how he hates weddings or this or that. Like he would always deflect by talking about something else. So he would create great sound bites, but he also wouldn't give anything that would add any fuel to any kind of fire football-wise. And regardless of how you answer questions, what you cannot do is give another team motivation and potentially put your team at risk of losing. Similar to what that Cincinnati mayor did, talking smack to the Kansas City Chiefs last year. He added fuel to the fire. You don't help your team when you talk smack, in my opinion. Unless you're like, hey, I'm going to talk smack and still win, but you're putting yourself at risk. And I'll tell you what now, Sean Payton better win that Week 5 game against the Jets. If you don't, then I would argue that this quote we just read, that cost the Broncos a win, which is the opposite of what Sean Payton's job is to do. Sean Payton's job is to win football games first and foremost, not to give entertaining good answers. So Donovan, while I like what he said, it was entertaining, that's not his job, and that's why he said the wrong thing, in my opinion.